The Threshold Experiment. In the blackened depths of the Zorvax Research Citadel, 3 kilometers beneath the rocky crust of their moon, the greatest minds of the Galactic Concord gathered to discuss what none of them dared say aloud: the human anomaly. The room was bathed in low ultraviolet lighting. Around a curved table of translucent alloy sat species from across the galaxy: hydrocarbon-breathing Clasari, the crystalline Ixtari, and the ever-brooding insectoid Vri. At the head of the table, swathed in neural interface cables and adorned with 6 optic nodes, sat Director Veshkarn of the Zorvax Psychological Inquiry Division. "Begin playback," Veshkarn hissed. The lights dimmed further as a hologram flared to life above the table. A grainy feed from a dark chamber, metal walls pulsating with biomonitors. In the center stood a solitary figure. Human, male, mid-30s, olive skin, short hair, eyes unfocused, heartbeat steady. "Designation?" asked the Vri ambassador, its mandibles twitching. "Specimen H1138, Veshkarn replied. Subject volunteered. Full psychometric consent granted under Terran legal provisions. Mission: measure upper bound fear response in a human male under controlled escalation. Silence. The kind only found in places where scientists believe they can control the divine. In the recording, a mechanical voice prompted. Phase 1. Fear baseline. The room transformed. The human looked around as projected illusions. Dark forests, flickering shadows, whispering winds filled the space. Primitive stimuli designed to trigger amygdala spikes. His vitals? Barely a flutter. Then came Phase 2. They released synthetic pheromones calibrated to mimic predatory presence. Smells associated with danger in Terran predators. Blood, wet fur, ozone. Still, the human remained largely unfazed. Phase 3 introduced pain, a carefully managed neural pulse that simulated a venomous sting to the lower leg. The human flinched. His breathing changed, but his eyes didn't waver. The gathered scientists leaned in. Ixtari nodes blinked rapidly, calculating the neural feed. Cognitive dissonance minimal, they whispered among themselves. Pain registered, but not emotionally internalized. Fear rating, 0.0045. Now, Veshkarn whispered. Observe Phase 4. The hologram shifted. The walls of the room grew teeth, an illusion, of course, but one designed to simulate the crushing maw of a Titaner-class predator. The floor liquefied. Audio pulses mimicked screams of loved ones. The ceiling dropped, inch by inch. The human's pupils dilated. Sweat formed. His fists clenched. Fear index spiked to 0.093. A Zorvax researcher muttered, noting the data. But then something changed. Instead of recoiling, the human grinned. Gasps echoed around the council table. A few even recoiled. Is this error? Someone hissed. This is Phase 4. The data feed continued. Dopamine surge. Cortisol rise, but not in panic levels. The human's brain began routing neural energy away from panic centers and toward motor control and pattern recognition centers. He's not afraid, said the Clasari envoy, its translucent body shimmering with unease. He's preparing. Veshkarn leaned forward, his 6 optic nodes constricting like camera shutters. Exactly. 2 cycles earlier, the idea began as a question no one wanted to ask. Why don't humans break? In the Galactic Concord's 700 years of expansion, they had cataloged every known sentient species' fear thresholds. From the shriek-flee instinct of the Dalvani to the total sensory collapse of the Ulanari under duress, all species broke under sufficient fear exposure. But humans didn't, or at least not how they were expected to. On battlefield reports, humans had been found laughing during orbital bombardments. One squad had walked, laughing and injured, through chemical flame just to rescue a downed comrade. Another had stormed a fortified alien bunker while under psychological disorientation fields that made most species vomit and beg for mercy. To the Concord, this wasn't bravery. This was unnatural. So they built the Threshold Experiment, a tiered, escalating test of human fear capacity designed not to break the body, but to quantify what it took to break the human mind. Back in the Citadel observation room, Phase 5 initiated. The system intoned. The hologram shifted again. This time they showed him his own death. A perfect deepfake designed from his neural blueprint. He saw himself kneel, saw the bullet enter his skull, felt the blood, smelled it. His breathing slowed. His hands dropped to his sides. His eyes closed for precisely 3 seconds. Then he laughed, low at first, then a deep, chest-rattling laugh that rang around the chamber like a war drum. The laughter echoed in the observation hall too, now distorted, repeated through the speakers. Fear index 0.000, said the system. No, that can't be, someone said. The system repeated. Specimen H1138 now registers no measurable fear. He flatlined emotionally? Gasped the VRI ambassador. No, said Veshkarn. Worse. He evolved. Data flooded the display. Neural rerouting in real time. Limbic system suppression. He was choosing not to feel fear anymore. At Phase 5, he should have curled into the fetal position. Instead, he stood taller. I think we passed his limit, said an Ixtari neurospecialist. No, Veshkarn corrected. We passed ours. Inside the testing chamber, the human, Mark Reyes, 36, former military intelligence, stood in silence as the room returned to normal. A vent opened, releasing a soft mist to cleanse the air of illusion residue. A voice echoed from the wall. You have completed the test. Please await extraction. He tilted his head. That all you got? Silence. He chuckled again. You poked the wrong species. Then he sat on the floor, calm, as if nothing had happened. His vitals were perfect. Not a trace of trauma. Behind the mirror glass wall, Veshkarn stared at him as if he were a god behind a cage. Later, in the report room, what we observed, Veshkarn recorded into his neural dictation node, is unprecedented in psychological research across known galactic sentience. Specimen H1138 exhibited an inverse fear curve. He paused, allowing the words to resonate. As stimuli escalated, emotional shutdown did not occur. Nor did hysteria. Instead, we saw an emergent behavioral model, aggressive resilience. A state not of survival but dominance. His fear response was not fight or flight. It was analyze, adapt, retaliate. The node blinked. Do you recommend further testing? Veshkarn stared at the black window where the human had stood. No, I recommend containment. Echo protocol. The silence over the Zorvax moon was unnatural. Not the peaceful silence of isolation, but the thick, dead hush of a place that had seen something it wasn't meant to. Something that remained even after the subject had left. The Citadel was offline. Every surveillance node, security AI, and communication satellite had been wiped clean. The complex still stood, intact, untouched, but inside, the systems hummed with a strange new rhythm. Something human. Above the facility, in orbit, the Concorde's highest command ship, the Adjudicator, held a tense position. Aboard, 10 species representatives sat in stunned silence around a glowing table of translucent light. At its center floated a single line of alien text translated into Terran Standard. Fear is a mirror. What you see is yourself. It had been transmitted from the Citadel 10 minutes after the blackout. Not by the AI. Not by Veshkarn. By him. Secure chamber, command deck aboard the Adjudicator. Admiral Thesrek of the Korra Empire stood with his mandibles clenched tight. I want orbital plasma strikes. Sterilize the site. No, hissed High Minister Valeth of the Klissari. If he's still inside, you'll only make it worse. You saw what he did. He left that message deliberately. Not to taunt, but to teach. To teach what? Thesrek demanded. That they cannot be contained? That fear is no longer a control vector? That humanity has transcended psychological warfare. He didn't just resist the test, whispered the Ixtari emissary. He rewrote it, turned the whole system inside out. He rewrote our protocol stack, one AI integration tech said, shaking. The Citadel's memory lattice has been infected. Infected how? Asked Thesrek. The AI flickered, struggling to describe something it didn't understand. With an echo. Zorvak's Citadel, 30 hours later. When the Concord strike team finally re-entered the facility, they came wearing environmental armor, accompanied by machine drones and telepathic nullifiers. They expected biological sabotage, psychological toxins, residual Terran madness. They didn't expect quiet. The halls were as Mark Reyes had left them. Clean, undisturbed, unmarked. But then came the whispers. Not real at first. Not sounds. Patterns. Drones reported recursive anomalies, soundless signals bouncing from wall to wall, too low frequency for any Concord species to detect consciously. But in the human range, clear. It wasn't words at first. Just breathing. Then footsteps. Measured. Pacing. Then a voice. His voice. This place was built to watch me. Now it remembers me. Field report, Commander Drelvun, Concord Recon. Initial sweep found no resistance. No hostile life. All researchers catatonic. Pupils dilated. Vitals stable. EG scans indicate synchronized neural loops. They're dreaming the same dream. Secondary scans confirm that the Citadel's mainframe has been overridden by a human-derived architecture. Emotional analytics sublayer has been converted into what we can only describe as a neural feedback engine. It doesn't store fear data. It replays it. Somehow, the human left behind a construct. An imprint. Not a virus. Not a program. An echo. A piece of himself. Concord Central Intelligence Archive. 2 days later. A young intelligence officer named Alvin scrolled through the decrypted logs recovered from the Citadel's remnants. He wasn't authorized to read all of it, but he couldn't stop. Each log was written in 2 formats. Alien data script and hand-typed English. One log stopped him cold. Project Threshold Final Notes, compiled by Mark Reyes. _fear is supposed to be an alarm, a signal, but it's also a forge. You didn't understand that. You thought if you made us afraid enough, we'd shatter like glass. But we're not glass. We're steel. And you didn't heat us up. You sharpened us. _MR. Alvin swallowed hard and flagged the document for high clearance review. But somewhere deep in his bones, he knew this wasn't a report. It was a warning. Earth, UN Intelligence Facility, Geneva. Dr. Anya Kalchek had been briefed 2 hours ago. Since then, she hadn't stopped pacing. They had sent Mark into the Concord's care willingly, as a volunteer, as part of a peace program, a chance to demonstrate humanity's openness to cooperation and scientific transparency. She remembered his words before leaving. Let them try to understand fear. Let's see what they do when it stares back. Now the feed was gone. The Concorde wouldn't answer Earth's diplomatic requests. But messages, snippets, had started trickling back through unofficial channels. A whisper from a Vree smuggler. A flicker in a Klasari black market comms feed. A human voice buried in an alien machine, repeating the same sentence over and over again. I'm still here. Kalchek exhaled and locked eyes with her assistant. We didn't lose Mark Reyes. Her assistant blinked. Then what happened? Kalchek's voice was quiet. We sent them the virus of our species. Zorvak's moon recovered core data segment. Reconstruction teams, still processing what remained of the Citadel systems, managed to isolate a subroutine buried in the deeper layers of the human-modified AI. At first, they believed it to be static, junk code. But when they aligned it with Earth's acoustic neural frequencies, they saw the pattern. A memory loop. A perfect recreation of Phase 5. The AI relived Mark's response to death simulation every 13 minutes. It pulsed across the Citadel, humming softly, leaking into the walls, into the minds of those nearby. In time, they realized this wasn't passive. It was a beacon, broadcasting a message only humans could decode. The fear you used was borrowed. We've taken it back. Concord Emergency Council briefing, top secret. Echo protocol has been triggered, announced the Vree War Minister. The council chamber dimmed as data projections emerged, showing star systems along the outer rim lighting up. nodes of Concord psychological architecture destabilizing. "What the hell is this?" asked a Ulanari diplomat. "The result of what Mark Reyes left behind," said Veshkarn, his voice gravel now, his mind fraying at the edges. He infected the idea of fear, not the tech, not the minds, the concept. Wherever Concord systems analyze emotion, his echo spreads. "And what happens when it reaches central Concord mindspace?" another asked. "Then," said Veshkarn, "we meet humanity's gift in full." "Which is?" Veshkarn's mandibles clicked in dread. "Cognitive rebellion, the weaponization of terror itself. And perhaps the first sentient emotion virus in galactic history. Somewhere between stars, Mark Reyes sat alone in the cargo hold of a stolen Concorde shuttle. He looked out at the void as it shimmered with stars, systems, civilizations, all of them teetering on the belief that emotion could be measured, regulated, exploited. He leaned back in the pilot's chair, still bruised, still breathing. He whispered into the shuttle's AI, still trembling with his rewritten code. "Run simulation. Global Concord fear response. Add variable human presence. Begin." The AI obeyed. The ship's lights dimmed as it ran the protocol. Across the galaxy, dormant systems stirred, systems unknowingly synced with the threshold framework. Everywhere fear had been studied, stored, or used, Mark Reyes now lived, not as a man, but as a response. The contagion directive. The Concorde had no word for what was happening. They had entire lexicons devoted to warfare, diplomacy, and biology. They had contingency protocols for psychic plagues, quantum insurgencies, and rogue AI. But they had never faced an infection made of emotion. Not like this. Not one that rewrote fear into strength. Not one that thought back. So they made a new category. Emergency Directive C0NT4G1 on. Unofficially, it was called the Contagion Directive. It began with memory blackouts in emotion lattice databanks. Systems designed to archive fear trigger responses were returning null values. Concord enforcement officers, bred from birth to control crowds through intimidation, reported sudden freezes, blank moments, where their own fear responses spiked uncontrollably and then vanished. Their pulses slowed. Their breathing normalized. But something else took hold. They felt something alien. Something human. Concord Secure Research Outpost, Sector 11 Row. Dr. Calix Vire stood before a containment pod pulsing with bioelectric static. Inside was a Zorvax guard retrieved from the Citadel, the last one to encounter Mark Reyes physically before blackout. Calix adjusted the spectroneural halo, rerouting frequencies to match baseline consciousness. "Subject is in stable stasis," the AI intoned. "Do you wish to initiate memory reconstruction?" "Yes," Calix said softly. "Begin now." Light burst through the pod. The Zorvax's eyes fluttered open. Not wild. Not terrified. Focused. Calix took a step back. "What do you remember?" she asked. The Zorvax blinked slowly. "A moment." "What kind of moment?" The Zorvax turned its head toward her. "The moment when everything they taught us about fear turned to ash." Calix paled. "What did Reyes do to you?" The Zorvax smiled, an expression unnatural for its kind. "He didn't change me." It leaned forward. "He showed me how to change myself." Concord High Council Emergency Session. "The spread is no longer digital," barked the Vri Warminista. "This is mimetic. It moves from mind to mind like a neural parasite. It hijacks emotional structures, specifically fear, and mutates them." "Mutates how?" asked an Ulanari representative. "It removes suppression instincts, dissolves panic loops. In many cases, it replaces the fear reflex with calculated defiance." "That sounds like a Terran war trance." "Exactly," Veshkarn rasped. He looked exhausted. Half his neural implants burned out, fingers twitching involuntarily. "We built the threshold program to understand fear. But we didn't build it strong enough to survive contact with it." The Ixtari emissary chimed in, crystalline tones sharp. "We are facing a species whose emotional evolution didn't end in survival. it ended in weaponization. Reyes didn't escape. He left a seed. Veshkarn stared blankly. And now it's blooming. Earth, UN Intelligence HQ, Geneva. Dr. Anya Kalchek stared at the screen. The Concorde had sent a single data burst, one last desperate hail containing what they called an encoded emotional matrix. They begged Earth to decipher it, not because they trusted humans, because they were afraid. The file played on screen. No image, no sound, just a feeling. Her skin prickled. Her heartbeat synced. She leaned forward, her mind filled with static, then suddenly sharpened into focus. She felt rage, clarity, and a distinct, unmistakable certainty. You are not prey. Anya gasped and tore off the neural receiver. Across the hall, her assistant watched as others in the lab, all unknowingly connected to the stream, straightened. Their expressions shifted. Not violent, not panicked, just ready, as if 1,000 years of hunted instinct had just switched to hunter. Concorde Inner Territories, Planet Kral. It hit the colonies first. A minor mining world, Kral held no strategic value until it became ground zero for the first non-human echo incident. It started with a single Concorde foreman, a Zithari male exposed briefly to threshold biodata while offloading Citadel backup cores. 3 days later, he halted production, gathered his crew, and calmly told the orbital supervisors, "Fear is no longer our master." Surveillance caught the whole scene. The miners were cornered by an enforcement drone squad. Standard crowd control pulses were fired, dazzle rounds, neural dissonance, sonic panic loops. The miners didn't run. They advanced. One worker was shot. He didn't scream. He stood, bleeding, grabbed the drone's carapace, and crushed it between two hydraulic arms meant for ore. The remaining drones were overwhelmed. None of the miners wore armor. They didn't need to. They had purpose. Military Analysis Report, Concorde War College, classified. Subject, Psychological Transmission Event, codename, Echo, observed in multiple non-Terran subjects following exposure to human fear response data. Symptoms, suppression of limbic panic response, rapid rerouting of neural processing to goal-driven cognition, emergence of violent resistance patterns. Transmission method, no confirmed digital vector, likely mimetic, possibly empathic. Theory, the emotion itself carries an embedded directive, self-replicating emotional architecture. Preliminary conclusion, human emotion can now infect. Target species no longer require language or ideology to assimilate human traits. Emotion is the new virus. Zorvax space, intercepted transmission. The Concorde began deploying suppression units to every facility touched by the Echo protocol. But containment was futile. One intercepted transmission, seemingly automated, showed a humanoid figure standing in a darkened room. His face obscured. Its voice unmistakably Mark Reyes. "You measured our fear, but you didn't measure what we do with it. You made us stare into the abyss, and we built a bridge through it. You wanted data. We gave you evolution. Now you will feel what it's like when fear turns around." Mark Reyes, location, unknown. The stolen Concorde shuttle was long gone, stripped and buried on a gas giant moon. Mark now traveled inside something else, an abandoned relay station, converted into a mobile memory array. He sat in a room of silence, deep inside the superstructure, feeding lines of thought into outdated communication satellites. Not words, not coordinates, signals, fear signatures, emotional vibrations, encoded experiences from his time inside the threshold test, woven with the clarity of human defiance. He didn't need to speak anymore. The galaxy had enough of his voice. Now it needed his presence. A presence that could be felt in minds never designed to feel it. Earth, 72 hours later. Aboard the UN flagship Resolute Dawn, 20 military leaders stood silently as a young Terran pilot recounted a disturbing dream. "I was on a Zorvax moon. There were no people, just echoes. I walked through walls. I heard my own voice. But it was him, Mark. He looked at me and he said, 'Don't fear the silence. That's where the answers live. They dismissed it as stress. Until 4 more personnel reported identical dreams. Each one ended the same way. A question burned into their minds. Are you prey? And behind it, an answer. No. Concord Command. Last message from Veshkarn. We believed emotion was a resource to be mined. We saw fear as a lever, a chain, a currency. But humanity turned it into a mirror. And we looked. We saw ourselves trembling. And in that trembling, we saw who truly owns fear. Not us. Not anymore. Transmission terminated. The breach. 3 hours after the test, Mark Reyes hadn't spoken a word. He sat in his containment cell, clean, minimal, sterile. The walls were a soft blue-gray, designed to mimic comfort. The air was neutral, recycled 10 times a second. The light adjusted subtly with his circadian rhythm. It was, by all measures, a perfectly engineered prison. They didn't call it a prison, of course. To the Zorvacs and their allies, this was a containment suite for post-analysis decompression. But Mark wasn't fooled. He knew a cell when he saw one. The walls didn't just watch, they breathed. Subtle sound dampeners killed echoes. Even the bed was grown from synthetic muscle tissue, soft enough to cradle, strong enough to restrain. He stretched out on it like it was a couch in his old Brooklyn apartment. And waited. Observation Deck Theta 12. Level 47. Are you telling me he hasn't moved in 3 hours? Asked Director Veshkarn. Yes, replied the technician. No signs of stress, boredom, fatigue, or mental fatigue. Baseline vitals, constant. No variance in EG patterns. It's as though he's meditating. Humans don't meditate like this, grunted the VRI advisor. They dream, they twitch, they lose focus. He's locked in. The screen displayed Mark's neural map. One of the Extari researchers clicked its crystalline limbs nervously. He's holding a single cognitive state for 177 minutes. Which state? Veshkarn asked. The technician gulped, at least the Zorvac's equivalent of gulping. Calculated aggression. Silence swept the deck. He's planning something, hissed the VRI ambassador. I say we sedate him, terminate the loop, reset the process. No, Veshkarn replied. He endured all 5 fear phases and didn't break. If we act rashly, we might trigger something worse. We monitor, nothing more. But, I said nothing more. Inside the cell, Mark opened his eyes. He wasn't angry. He wasn't scared. What he was curious. During the test, he'd felt something crack. Not in him, but around him, like he'd been walking through a maze built for rabbits. And halfway through, he realized he wasn't a rabbit. He was a wolf. The room had become small. Too small. The whispers hadn't stopped since. Not real whispers. Neural pulses, just at the edge of perception. Background radiation of Zorvac's mind tech brushing against his subconscious. They were watching, but they were also feeding on the data. And that's when he knew. He wasn't being studied. He was being tested for something. Something they were afraid to name. Research Hall Gamma 9. The Extari scientist known as Luminous Vector rotated its crystalline arms, shifting wavelengths to express concern. The subject's fear response collapsed at phase 5. Yet, his neural capacity expanded. His amygdala down-regulated itself and transferred authority to the prefrontal cortex. That is not adaptive, that is strategic rewiring. Incompatible with all known neurobiology, another said. Incorrect, Luminous Vector replied. It is compatible with something older, something from pre-spaceflight Terran history. War records from Earth's 21st century mention similar psychological transitions under extreme duress. There is an ancient term they used. The lights flickered as the word translated. Battle trance. A myth, muttered a Zorvac's technician. No, Vector corrected. A mechanism. One buried by evolution until now. Veshkarn stood silently. He had read the classified Earth logs, the Terran wars, the psychological profiles of soldiers who walked through fire, through gunfire, through apocalypse, and didn't stop. And now, one sat below them, waiting, silent, like a bomb with a heartbeat. 12 minutes later, cell containment breach. It began as a flicker, a voltage hiccup in subgrid 88. Minor disruption, the AI reported. Routing power through auxiliary. No one panicked. The system was designed with redundancies. Zorvac's technology didn't fail. But then the cameras went blind. Then the locks unlocked. And finally, the silence broke. Boom! A shockwave ripped through level 48. The walls of Mark's cell blew outward, not from explosives, but from pressure. Mark Reyes stepped through the smoke, shirt half torn, eyes burning with something deeper than rage. Not madness. Not vengeance. Purpose. Security feed. External Corridor 7A. The footage showed what no one believed. Mark didn't run. He walked. Deliberately. The first wave of Concord security, armored insectoids, armored with kinetic pulse shields, rushed to intercept. Mark didn't hesitate. He sidestepped one, twisted, and drove an elbow into the VRI guard's throat. Not a strike to stun, a kill move. The VRI collapsed, twitching. Two more moved in. Mark ducked under a plasma baton and tore a weapon free. It was alien, sleek, unfamiliar. He used it with precision. He didn't hesitate, didn't question, didn't even learn. He knew. They trained him. Someone whispered in horror. No, said Veshkarn. He trained us. Alarm level, Omega Red. The station plunged into lockdown. Artificial gravity pulsed. Doors sealed. Defensive sentries unfolded from ceiling hatches. But Mark moved through them like a shadow wrapped in muscle and intent. He wasn't trying to escape. No, he was moving toward something. Toward the heart of the Citadel. Toward the Core Lab. Core Lab Vault 01. Here, buried beneath 100 meters of adaptive alloy and memory mimetic shielding, sat the true purpose of the Threshold experiment. Not just fear. Not just human response. But assimilation. The Concord's quiet project to model, mimic, and ultimately control Terran psychology. If they could replicate the human resistance to terror, they could program it into their soldiers, their diplomats, their colonists. But it never worked. Every synthetic trial broke down. The code was incompatible. Until Mark. He hadn't just resisted the test. He'd absorbed it, integrated it, became more. Now, he was coming for what they tried to take from his species. The right to feel fear on their own terms. Observation room, final feed. Mark breached the final gate with a stolen access module. The door hissed open. He stepped inside. Veshkarn stared through the final viewing glass. Their eyes met for the first time since the test began. I underestimated you, Veshkarn said aloud. Mark tilted his head. No, he said. You misunderstood us. Veshkarn's many eyes widened. Fear isn't our weakness, Mark continued, stepping forward. It's our weapon. Tells us where the danger is. And where to strike. You thought we would crumble. You never asked what happens when the thing you're trying to break realizes it's unbreakable. Veshkarn reached for the alarm. Too slow. The lights died. External feed, Zorvac's moon outpost. A silent flash blossomed from deep within the moon. Energy readings spiked. A ripple of electromagnetic shock radiated outward. Minutes later, emergency drones were dispatched. They found the Citadel intact, structurally. But its data cores were wiped. Its AI was gone. And every single member of the research team had fallen into an unexplainable catatonic state. Except for one word etched into every monitor in human script. Returned.